Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at President Trump's recent inaugural address. And we're going to be looking at it through the lens of two fact-checking articles
Right.
from factcheck.org. One breaks down the address itself, and the other one looks at the state of the nation as he's stepping in.
Interesting.
So really, it's not so much about the political side of things as it is about, getting down to the facts
Right.
and the truth,
Yeah.
So consider this like a little fact-finding mission that we're all going on together.
Yeah, I think it's really important to give people the tools to navigate this really kind of crazy information world that we live in these days,
Exactly.
especially when it comes to something as potentially divisive as politics.
Yeah.
You know.
So let's get into it. The first thing we want to look at is the economy and jobs.
Okay.
And, on the surface, things seem pretty good. Since Trump left office in 2021, the economy has steadily grown. It's added over 16 million jobs.
Wow.
Unemployment is lower than historical averages. Sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah, it does sound pretty positive. But it's important to remember that there's always more to the story. The sources that we're looking at, they point out that while inflation is down from its peak, it's starting to creep back up. And then we have this thing called real wages, which basically means what your pay actually buys after you consider what inflation is doing.
Right.
And those are still lagging behind where they were back in 2020.
So you could have a job, but still
Yeah,
be feeling like you're not getting ahead.
exactly. You'd be working more
Yeah.
and making less
Yeah.
in terms of actual buying power.
That's a really important point. All right, so let's move on to some of the promises that Trump made in his speech. Bringing back law and order, scrapping the Green New Deal, ditching the EV mandate. He didn't hold back.
Yeah, he was not. Mincing words.
No, he wasn't.
Factcheck.org did a really good job of breaking down each one of those claims. Let's start with the promise to tax foreign countries through tariffs, right?
Yeah.
To kind of help American citizens. On the surface, it sounds pretty appealing, right?
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love the idea of, America first?
Yeah, it's a very appealing slogan.
Well, what's the reality of that?
So the reality is that tariffs
Yeah.
aren't actually paid by those foreign countries. They're paid by U.S. companies that are importing goods. And then those costs get passed on to guess who?
Let me guess, American consumers.
You got it. American consumers. So instead of taxing foreign countries, you're actually just hitting people in their wallets.
Right, and making them pay more for things.
Exactly.
So not the simple solution it's made out to be.
Not at all.
All right, what about the claim that there was record inflation under Biden?
Oh, that's a good one. That one is just plain wrong. When we look back at the historical data, we see that we've actually had much higher inflation rates in the past,
Really?
particularly in the 70s and 80s.
Wow. So history really puts things in perspective sometimes.
It really does.
Okay, so this next one I found interesting. Trump said that China operates the Panama Canal,
Okay.
and he exaggerated the number of American lives that were lost during its construction.
Interesting.
Is there any truth to that?
Not really.
Yeah.
So the fact checkers debunked both parts of that statement. While a company based in Hong Kong does manage ports at both ends of the canal, Panama itself still controls the operations.
Okay.
And the number of American lives lost during the construction was way lower than Trump claimed.
So more fact-checking, more myth-busting. Let's move on to Hurricane Helene.
Okay.
Trump implied that FEMA did not respond adequately. What did our sources say about that?
That's misleading. FEMA was actually quite active in the relief efforts. They provided food and water and millions of dollars in aid to the affected states, including North Carolina.
So again, not the full picture. It seems like
Okay.
a bit of a pattern is emerging here.
Okay.
Let's shift gears to oil and gas.
Okay.
Trump promised to drill, baby, drill.
Classic campaign slogan.
Right. And asserting that the U.S. holds the world's largest oil and gas reserves. Does that hold up?
It does not. According to the data, there are several other countries that have larger estimated reserves than the U.S.
Interesting. So that claim about restoring American energy dominance doesn't quite match up with reality.
Not really.
Now, what about his statement that massive overspending and energy prices were the only causes of inflation? It seems a bit simplistic, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It kind of ignores this whole complex web of factors that contribute to inflation. Think about, the lingering effects of the pandemic supply chain disruptions, global events like Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These all played a part.
Yeah, inflation is way more complicated. than just one or two factors.
Right, it's not a simple issue.
Now let's talk about those promises to end the Green New Deal
Okay.
and the electric vehicle mandate.
The EV mandate. This is where things get interesting. So first of all, there isn't technically a Green New Deal to end. It was a non-binding resolution. That never became law. And then secondly, there's no EV mandate. That's forcing people to buy electric vehicles.
Okay.
The Biden administration implemented some regulations to reduce emissions and improve fuel efficiency. But automakers still have flexibility in how they meet those goals.
So a lot of talk, but not much actual policy to dismantle.
Yeah, it's more about rhetoric than reality.
Okay, let's talk about law and order.
Okay.
Trump promised to restore it, implying that crime was out of control. Under Biden, what does the data show?
Well, contrary to his claims, the data shows that there was a slight decrease in violent crime since he left office.
Wow, that's a stark contrast to the picture
Yeah.
that he painted.
Yeah, it's important to look at the numbers.
And then there's the claim about immigrants coming from prisons and mental institutions.
Right, that one's back. And again, no evidence to support that.
So we're seeing a trend here.
We are.
But before we move on, I want to touch on those repeated assertions about the 2020 election being rigged and the January 6th committee destroying evidence. These claims have been circulating for a while now.
Yeah, they have. Factcheck.org addressed those as well. They found no evidence of widespread fraud in 2020. And the January 6th committee actually published a very detailed report with substantial evidence about what happened that day.
So if these claims have been debunked, why do they persist? It really makes you think about how misinformation takes root and spreads, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question.
We'll delve into that more in the next part of our deep dive.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How certain narratives, even when they're proven false, can still have so much power.
It's a really interesting question, and it actually ties into the other fact-check article that we have, the one that looks at the state of the nation that President Trump inherited.
Right.
This gives us really important context for, his claims and promises.
Okay, so beyond the economic figures we talked about, what else stood out to you?
One area that I found interesting was oil production. It turns out that the U.S. has actually been the world leader in crude oil production for the past 6 years, setting new records in both 2023 and 2024. So even though Trump talks about restoring American energy dominance, the data suggests we never really lost that top spot.
Yeah, pretty much. It challenges that whole narrative that we had become energy dependent under Biden.
Right.
Which is something that Trump repeated a lot during his campaign.
It's all about looking at the nuances, right? Going beyond those sound bites.
Absolutely.
And digging into the data.
That's where the real story is.
Okay, what about immigration? That was another major focus for Trump.
Yeah, immigration, that's always a big one. It's a complex issue with a lot of different factors at play. So border apprehensions have actually decreased in recent months, particularly since Biden implemented those stricter asylum eligibility rules. But for a lot of his presidency, illegal immigration was at historic highs.
So it's kind of like a mixed bag then.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Not as straightforward as the political rhetoric makes it seem.
Nope, definitely not. And it's also worth noting that, while Biden cracked down on illegal border crossings, he also tried to encourage a more orderly process for people seeking asylum through that CBP-1 app.
Right.
And that actually led to a significant increase in migrants presenting themselves at official ports of entry.
So there are a lot of different approaches and strategies being used.
Exactly.
And it all contributes to this really multifaceted issue. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the stock market.
Okay.
I imagine a lot of people are curious about how their investments performed under the previous administration.
For sure. Yeah, people always want to know about the stock market.
Right.
Well, anyone who invests in the stock market. Well, Trump was out of office, saw some really impressive gains.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the S&P 500 increased by almost 58% since the end of his first term.
Wow, that's significant.
It is, but, it's important to remember that the stock market is just one indicator of economic health.
Right.
It doesn't tell the whole story.
Especially when it comes to how individuals are doing financially.
Exactly.
We still have those issues with inflation and wages not keeping up.
Right, a rising tide doesn't lift all boats, as they say.
Okay, so speaking of getting the full picture,
Yeah.
what about healthcare?
Healthcare, another hot button issue for sure. Well, here's an interesting fact. The percentage of Americans without health insurance actually decreased under Biden.
Really? That's surprising. Considering all the criticism that the Affordable Care Act received?
Yeah, it is interesting. Enrollment in those ACA marketplace plans actually reached record highs during Biden's term. partially because of expanded subsidies. Healthcare is still obviously a very complex and debated issue. But it is important to acknowledge that progress was made in terms of expanding coverage.
So the nation that President Trump inherited wasn't all doom and gloom like his rhetoric might suggest.
It was a mixed bag, like most things in life.
A mix of positives and negatives.
Exactly, and that's why it's so important to do this. Fact-checking and critical thinking.
We need to go beyond just the sound bites and the slogan.
Absolutely, look at the data.
Understand the nuances.
And form our own conclusions.
It's easy to get swept up in the rhetoric.
Oh, yeah, especially these days with 247 news and social media.
So we're doing this deep dive to help you navigate this sea of information and be more discerning and engaged citizens.
That's the goal.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up this part, I want to touch on something that often gets overshadowed by more sensational issues.
Good. What's that?
The federal debt and deficits.
The debt. It's always looming, isn't it? It is an important issue, though, one with long-term consequences. And the truth is, the U.S. debt has continued to rise under both Republican and Democratic administrations.
So it's not a partisan problem?
Not really. It's a systemic one.
It's complex.
Very complex.
And it's something that we as citizens need to be paying attention to, regardless of our political beliefs.
Absolutely. We need to hold our leaders accountable.
And demand responsible fiscal policies.
Exactly.
As we move into the final part of this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. In a world where information is everywhere, but accuracy is often elusive, what is our responsibility as individuals? To be informed and discerning citizens. That is the challenge, isn't it? In this age of information overload, how do we cut through all that noise and get to the truth?
It really does sometimes feel like an uphill battle against misinformation and spin.
It does. So cultivating critical thinking skills, I think, is more important now than ever.
I completely agree with that. It's not just about knowing a bunch of facts. It's about understanding how to evaluate the information that's coming at you.
Right.
Recognize biases. Consider different perspectives.
So we need to become like information detectives.
Like that.
Scrutinizing the evidence, connecting the dots, not jumping to conclusions.
Thinking critically.
And one of the most valuable tools I think we have in that is knowing how to fact check.
Oh, for sure.
Organizations like factcheck.org, our source for this deep dive, they do all the heavy lifting by providing that nonpartisan analysis of political claims and statements.
They're doing the hard work for us.
They are.
But we have to do our part, too.
And they've certainly done a deep dive on Trump's inaugural address.
They have.
Providing all that valuable context and analysis.
And one of the things I think is really important to remember is that even seemingly straightforward claims can be misleading or taken out of context.
So we have to be active participants in this information process.
Not just passively consuming it.
Right.
But questioning it, verifying it.
Actively seeking the truth.
And being okay with being wrong sometimes.
Oh, that's so important. Being okay with changing your mind.
It's not a weakness to change your mind. It's a sign of growth.
It is.
Yeah.
And recognizing that facts matter, even when they challenge our preconceived notions.
That's the hard part sometimes.
It is.
But it's essential.
I love that phrase, intellectual humility. It's something we could all use a little bit more of.
Especially these days.
It's crucial to remember that misinformation often plays on our emotions.
Our fears and biases.
Right.
It's designed to get a reaction out of us rather than encourage thoughtful consideration.
So how do we guard against that? How do we become more discerning information consumers?
Well, one thing I think is really important is to diversify your news sources. Don't just rely on, one outlet or perspective.
Okay.
Expose yourself to a range of viewpoints, even ones that you might not initially agree with.
So it's about getting that full picture.
The whole picture.
Not just the echo chamber of what we already believe.
Exactly. Break out of those echo chambers.
And be wary of the sensational headlines.
Oh, yeah, those clickbait headlines.
Right.
Emotionally charged language. Those are red flags for misinformation.
So what should we be looking for?
To look for evidence-based reporting. Sources that, cite credible studies or data.
It's like being a detective, right?
It is.
We're looking for facts, not just opinions or gut feelings.
Exactly.
And don't be afraid to question what you see and hear.
Question everything.
If something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
There's a reason why that's a saying.
Those fact-checking websites, like factcheck.org, can be so helpful.
They really can.
They provide that unbiased analysis,
Oh.
and they help us separate fact from fiction.
They do the heavy lifting.
But it really does come down to personal responsibility. We each have a role to play in combating misinformation.
It's a collective effort.
It is.
And it starts with being aware of our own biases,
Yeah.
questioning what we see and hear, and just thinking critically.
So this deep dive into President Trump's inaugural address is really about more than just his words. It's about equipping ourselves with the tools to navigate this complex world of information that we live in.
It's a wild world out there,
It
but
is.
we have the power to make sense of it.
And it's about recognizing that that battle against misinformation is ongoing.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And that we as individuals have the power to be informed and discerning citizens.
We all have that power.
We do. So on that note, we're going to leave you with one final thought. What steps can you take starting today to be a more critical thinker and a more responsible consumer of information? Keep those detective hats on, everybody.
That's a great way to put it.
And until next time, stay curious.